Stone corridors breathe tonight. 8 centuries of candle smoke cling to the rafters as if history itself refuses to leave. Somewhere beyond these vaulted ceilings, a child king presses his face to cold marble and wonders why the crown weighs more than his own skull. Moments later, far across the black forest, a countess stirs copper into her bath, counting heartbeats that are not her own. Royal blood, they say, runs thick and strange. It curdles into rituals the sane will never understand. Behind the velvet drapes of every palace lies a chamber no guidebook mentions. You won't find it on tourist maps, yet its walls remember the hollow thud of fists that once begged for mercy. Each throne carries scars deeper than the jewels encrusted upon it. Some kings fed nations. The 11 we follow tonight fed darker hungers. They locked doors, covered mirrors, outlawed laughter, and still the screams leaked through the keyholes. Picture a banquet table stretching beneath a forest of impaled bodies, one monarch calmly buttering bread while sap and blood drip into his goblet. Envision a despot who believed moonlight could shatter him like spun glass, commanding silence with the terror of a man about to burst into shards. See the emperor who vanished inside 4 gilded walls for 27 years, signing death warrants in absolute darkness because daylight had grown unbearable. These are not campfire tales invented to frighten children into obedience. Ink dried on parchment for each atrocity, tax ledgers tallied the cost in human coin, and widows learned to curse quietly so the wind wouldn't carry their names back to the palace. Tonight we walk where courtiers once feared to tread. We open ledgers that recorded livestock, harvests, and the number of virgins delivered before the first frost. Every number tells a story, every silence hides a scream. Lock your doors, silence your phones, and keep one finger near the light switch. The past is patient, it already knows you're listening. Blood-stained crowns have never guaranteed sanity. Throughout the corridors of power, where whispers echo louder than screams, history's most deranged monarchs indulged in pleasures that would make even the most hardened executioner turn pale. These weren't mere eccentricities or royal quirks. These were obsessions that carved rivers of suffering through entire kingdoms, leaving trails of broken bodies and shattered minds in their wake. When Vlad the Impaler wasn't decorating his forests with human kebabs, he hosted dinner parties where guests dined among the dying. The forest outside Targovite became his personal art gallery, each impaled body carefully positioned at different heights to create what he called his forest of the dead. His favorite pastime involved inviting foreign ambassadors to walk through this macabre exhibition, watching their faces drain of color as they realized the taller stakes held children who bore an unsettling resemblance to their own sons and daughters back home. During one particularly gruesome feast, he forced boyars to eat while surrounded by thousands of impaled corpses, the stench so overwhelming that several guests vomited onto their gold plates. Vlad merely smiled, sliced open a roasted peacock, and remarked how the birds and sides looked remarkably similar to human entrails. In the shadow-drenched halls of the Castel Sant'Angelo, Pope Alexander VI held court over poisonings that would make even the Borgias blush. His private chambers contained dozens of locked cabinets, each filled with exotic toxins harvested from every corner of the known world. The pontiff conducted experiments on prisoners, documenting in meticulous detail how different poisons affected the human body. His favorite concoction, a slow-acting arsenic compound he called the angel's kiss, caused victims to experience 3 days of euphoria before their organs liquefied. He would watch from behind a hidden panel as they laughed and danced, convinced they'd been blessed rather than cursed, until blood began seeping from their eyes and ears. The screams that followed weren't quite human anymore. These royal madmen didn't just rule, they reveled in their power, transforming their darkest impulses into state policy. Every decree carried the weight of centuries of accumulated cruelty, every law written in the blood of those who dared to question their authority. Behind every golden throne sat a mind twisted by absolute power, where the line between monarch and monster blurred into something far more terrifying than either could be alone. Blood never quite washes away. In the shadowed corridors of the Reggia di Caserta, Ferdinand IV of Naples practiced his favorite pastime, watching prisoners drown in the palace's underground chambers. Each morning, as golden sunlight spilled through Baroque windows above ground, the king descended into darkness where screams echoed off ancient stone. He'd position himself on a velvet-cushioned chair, sipping wine from a golden goblet while his guards systematically flooded the cells. The water rose slowly, deliberately, giving each condemned soul time to fully understand their fate. Ferdinand kept meticulous records. 17 minutes for a strong man, 23 for a woman carrying child. His journals, discovered centuries later, revealed sketches drawn from memory, faces twisted in final agony, hands pressed against iron bars, mouths open in silent screams. History's most disturbing monarchs turned torture into artistry. Vlad Dracula didn't merely impale his enemies, he orchestrated entire forests of the dying. 20,000 Ottoman prisoners, arranged in precise geometric patterns across the Wallachian countryside, created what one Turkish chronicler described as a macabre garden where men grew instead of trees. The voivode personally inspected each spike's placement, ensuring maximum suffering. Those still alive after 3 days earned a twisted mercy. They'd be cut down, their wounds packed with salt and honey, then released to crawl back to their lines as living warnings. Vlad's dining habits proved equally grotesque. He'd feast among the impaled, using protruding ribs as makeshift tables, dipping bread into blood that pooled below. A German pamphlet from 1463 depicts him eating lunch while a pregnant woman writhed on a stake specifically positioned to prolong her agony through his entire meal. Power corrupts, absolutely, but absolute power creates nightmares. Ivan the Terrible's Moscow court resembled a theater of cruelty where the Tsar played both director and star. His personal torture chamber, the Malyuta's office, featured instruments of his own design, including iron boots that slowly crushed feet while heated from within. Ivan particularly enjoyed forcing families to choose which member would die first, sometimes making parents decide between children based on their recitation of prayers. During the massacre of Novgorod, he allegedly built walls using living monks as mortar, bricking them into the structure while still breathing. Children were thrown from cathedral towers, their bodies collected below to clear the snow for sleigh races where Ivan drove teams of wolves he'd personally starved into frenzy. These rulers didn't merely kill, they transformed death into spectacle, suffering into science, and human misery into their personal entertainment. Each drop of blood became ink in their dark chronicles, each scream a note in their twisted symphonies. The corridors of Fontainebleau Palace reeked of gunpowder and blood long before the Revolution. King Henry III of France didn't merely walk them, he prowled, a silver dagger glinting beneath every fold of black silk. Courtiers whispered that the monarch's nightly ritual was less pageantry than exorcism. Every dusk he gathered his 48 most trusted minions, the young nobles whose velvet collars dripped lace and poison, formed them into 2 ranks, and ordered them to kneel while he pressed the blade to each man's throat. Not to kill, never that. He simply needed the pulse of another heart against steel to remind himself he still possessed one. One witness, writing years later from a Spanish dungeon, claimed the king's pupils dilated like a wolf's each time metal kissed skin, that a thin, ecstatic sigh escaped his lips when the chosen favorite trembled. The court called it devotion. The palace servants called it what it was, feeding. When the blade was returned to its ivory sheath, Henry moved to his private chapel. Inside, wax effigies of his enemies hung from butcher's hooks. The Duke of Guise, Catherine de' Medici, even the Pope. He spoke to them in whispers too low for the priests waiting outside, promises of slow disembowelment, of tongues torn out while their owners still screamed for mercy. Then he lit black candles scavenged from plague parishes and watched the faces melt, the wax pooling at his feet like congealed fat. By morning, the tiles were scrubbed clean by trembling novices, but the stench of scorched wick lingered in the rafters for days. Yet the most grotesque habit waited beyond the chapel doors. Henry kept a dwarf named Beringer chained to an iron ring beside his bed. Each night the king demanded a story, never the same one twice, under pain of flogging. Beringer's voice cracked with exhaustion, yet he spun tales of butchered saints and rivers of gold, of men who ate their own hearts to gain immortality. Henry listened with the stillness of a corpse, a jeweled hand resting on the dwarf's shoulder, thumb circling the hollow above the collarbone, as if measuring the exact spot where pressure would collapse the windpipe. When the tale ended, the king released his grip, kissed Beringer's forehead with chilling tenderness, and whispered, "Tomorrow you die." Every dawn he repeated the promise. Every dusk he rescinded it, savoring the terror that bloomed fresh in the dwarf's eyes. In this nightly resurrection Henry tasted a sweeter power than any crown could bestow, the divine authority to grant and revoke mortality on a whim. King Farouk of Egypt understood that hunger could be weaponized. Every Tuesday at precisely 7:30, the palace kitchens filled with the hiss of butter melting in copper pans. Chefs cracked eggs by the dozen, folded chocolate into batter, and stacked pancakes until they teetered like gold coins in a dragon's hoard. The royal table groaned under lobster, foie gras, and towers of pastries glazed with rose water. Yet the king himself remained upstairs, pacing the silk runner that stretched the length of his bedroom. He would not eat tonight. Instead, he watched through a peephole drilled into a velvet portrait of his father, eyes glinting while the courtiers devoured every crumb. When the plates were scraped clean, the footmen carried in silver platters of baklava, glistening with honey thick as blood. Farouk's stomach cramped, a pain he cherished like a secret lover. He descended only after the last guest had left, stepping over abandoned napkins and half glasses of champagne. Alone amid the ruin, he gathered the leftovers, the broken pastry edges, the lobster claws stripped of meat, the cold pancakes, and fed them to the stray cats he kept caged behind the palace. Their claws scored his wrists, and he let the blood mingle with the syrup. Hunger, he whispered to them, keeps the mind sharp. Meanwhile, in the iron forests of Sweden, King Adolf Frederick staged a different kind of feast. His physicians had warned him that his heart beat too fast, that the blood in his veins felt like molten lead. They begged him to take boiled turnips and weak tea. The king laughed, a sound like ice cracking on a winter lake. On the 12th of February, 1771, he ordered his favorite meal one last time. Sauerkraut, turnip soup, caviar, smoked herring, and champagne, then lobster, kippers, and more champagne, then 14 servings of semla, those sweet almond buns swollen with cream. He court-watched in transfixed horror as he lifted each bun to his lips, cream clinging to his beard like snow. Between bites he smiled, serene as a man greeting an old friend. When the 14th bun vanished, he leaned back, patted his swollen stomach, and died before the candles guttered out. The autopsy revealed a stomach stretched so thin the physicians could see the imprint of the last pastry against the wall of his abdomen. 2 monarchs, 2 thrones, but the same ravenous shadow. One starved others to feel control. One gorged himself to feel alive. Between them stretched an empire of silver platters and empty cages, a testament to the lengths a king will go when the crown no longer satisfies the hollow beneath it. King Henry VIII's bedroom reeked of pus and rose water. Each night he ordered 4 fresh mattresses stacked over the old ones, yet the stench of his infected leg wounds soaked through every layer. Courtiers whispered that the royal sheets looked like battle flags, crimson maps of a war fought beneath the blankets. When the ulcers wept, Henry summoned his grooms to lance them again, biting down on a leather strap while hot metal hissed against rotting flesh. The smell lingered so long that even the tapestries seemed to sweat blood. Across Europe, Tsar Peter the Great stalked the frozen docks of St. Petersburg barefoot. Frostbite blackened his toes, but the giant monarch still lifted hammers beside common laborers, cursing in 4 languages when his fingers split open. He kept a surgeon on a leash, literally, forcing the trembling man to stitch royal skin without laudanum. Peter's reward for endurance was a dram of pepper vodka, gulped while the wind screamed across the Neva like a widow. Every scar became a lesson carved into imperial muscle. In the crimson palace of Fatehpur Sikri, Emperor Jahangir weighed himself against gold, jewels, and sacks of grain each harvest. The scales groaned under his bulk, but the true horror waited inside the balance beam. Hollow cavities packed with opium paste. While astrologers chanted, Jahangir inhaled the bitter smoke rising through tiny vents, eyes rolling white as marble. By evening the beam tilted, gold spilled across the floor, and eunuchs scrambled to collect the fortune their master had literally sweated out in hallucinations of tigers devouring the moon. Catherine de' Medici kept a locked cabinet in the Louvre filled with glass eyes. She swapped them daily, believing each color granted a different vision: blue for politics, green for poison, black for prophecy. Servants found her at dawn pressing a fresh orb into the socket of a decapitated falcon, whispering questions in Italian too ancient for any living tongue. When the bird's head finally rotted, she replaced it with the skull of her dwarf jester, laughing until blood dotted her lips. King Ferdinand I of Naples constructed an orchestra from prisoners. He tuned flayed human skin over drums, stretched vocal cords across lyres, and used femurs as flutes. During banquets he forced the mutilated choir to sing love songs to their own severed limbs displayed on silver platters. Ferdinand conducted with a scepter tipped in dried ears, swaying in time to the wet percussion of dripping wounds. When the final note faded, he clapped slowly, each slap echoing like a coffin lid closing over Naples itself. Night has fallen across the blood-blackened palace of Vlad III Dracula, and the air itself tastes of copper and smoke. Somewhere in the maze of torch-lit corridors, the Impaler performs his nightly ritual. A slow walk along parapets where thousands of human scarecrows still twitch on sharpened stakes, each body lowered just enough for him to whisper a question only the dying can answer. He listens to the wet rattle of punctured lungs, cataloging every confession like a monk counting rosary beads. When the last breath steams into frost, he nods, satisfied that Transylvania itself has spoken its secrets through the dying. Far to the west, inside a candle-starved chamber beneath Whitehall, King Charles II lifts the lid from a velvet-lined box. Inside rests the withered heart of his father, preserved in brandy and cloves. Every anniversary of regicide, the merry monarch removes the relic, pierces it with a golden lancet, and drinks the dark liquor that bleeds out. He swears the alcohol carries memories, battle drums, scaffold prayers, the exact timbre of a crown hitting straw. Court physicians swear the habit keeps him young. Court gossips whisper it keeps him human. Beneath the dome of a crumbling Ottoman observatory, Sultan Ibrahim I spends the final minutes before dawn hurling pearls into the Bosphorus. Each tear-shaped sphere represents a concubine who failed to smile exactly the way his murdered mother once did. He counts them aloud, 391 tonight, watching moonlight fracture across the water like the shards of every mirror he has smashed in fits of rage. When the last pearl sinks, he orders another fishing expedition. The divers risk drowning because failure to retrieve even one means joining the necklace of severed heads already decorating the palace gate. In the humid twilight of a Burmese teak palace, King Bodapaya forces his courtiers to play hide-and-seek among pyramids of enemy skulls. The loser, always predetermined by whispered astrological charts, must spend the night inside the royal crematorium, lying inside an iron coffin heated from beneath by funeral pyres. The king listens to the screams the way others listen to songbirds, timing the duration on an hourglass filled with ground bone instead of sand. At sunrise he releases the survivor, skin blistered and eyes wild, then invites him to breakfast as though nothing happened. Finally, Within the frostbitten halls of the Winter Palace, Tsar I polishes the uniforms of dead soldiers every evening at 9. Mannequins dressed as his father's enemies stand in rigid formation while the Tsar crawls between their boots, whispering apologies for victories he never earned. At midnight he shoots each effigy in the heart, then begins again the next night with fresh apologies and new bullet holes. The cycle never ends. The blood on his hands has long since dried into black lacquer, yet still he scrubs, convinced absolution waits somewhere between gunpowder and regret. The candles gutter low across these 11 chambers, each thrown now nothing more than splintered wood and tarnished gold. What remains is not glory, but the sour smell of power curdling into madness. In Beijing's forbidden city, Wanli silk robes have become moth-eaten shrouds for mice. Down in Wallachian forests, stakes still jut from the earth like broken teeth, though the flesh that once screamed upon them has long since melted into the soil. Somewhere beneath Prague Castle, Rudolph's mechanical beetles lie frozen mid-crawl, their jeweled wings dulled by centuries of dust. These monarchs believed their whims would echo forever. Instead, the world learned to whisper their names only when teaching children what happens when absolute power meets absolute isolation. Mothers still hush babies with tales of the Blood Countess, though the castle where she bathes stands hollow, its mirrors cracked and bleeding silver. The Ottoman seraglio where Ibrahim drowned his sugar dolls in syrup has become a museum where tourists photograph empty fountains and wonder why the air still tastes of burnt honey. History's most brutal lesson hides in plain sight. Every crown eventually becomes a shackle, every throne a tomb. The boy who vanished behind lacquered doors, the glass king who feared moonlight, the woman who wore blood as lotion. They all discovered that power without sanity creates not immortality, but a particularly exquisite form of living death. Their kingdoms moved on. Rivers changed course. Languages evolved until their very names sounded foreign on new tongues. Yet something lingers in these abandoned halls, a knowledge that absolute power doesn't corrupt absolutely. It reveals absolutely. Behind each jeweled curtain, beneath every gold-threaded robe, waited the same small, terrified creature that exists in all of us. The only difference, these 11 wrapped entire civilizations around their private nightmares, making millions share the weight of their personal darkness. The doors to these throne rooms have splintered open. The night wind carries away the last incense of madness. What remains is simple, terrible, true. Every crown weighs exactly as much as the soul beneath it.